Hello, my dears, Daniela here, and welcome to the Spa Marketing Made Easy podcast. This episode is brought to you by Addo Aesthetics, the #1 coaching company for aesthetic professionals wanting to step into the role of spa CEO. And today we've got a great episode for you. Have you ever heard that saying or heard me say, when the market's zigging, we zag? Well, in the past 2 years, there has been just tremendous growth in the amount of spas utilizing digital marketing, which I love. I'm absolutely thrilled about that because I love so many things digital, from Facebook ads to Google ads. I love how you can track them, all the things. So super happy to see that. But I'm always asking myself, how can we zag, right? What can we do differently in a crowded marketplace? So if everyone's moving to digital, I still want to do digital, but how can I do something different that's going to help me stand out? So my guest, Dave Fink, has been in the marketing space for a very long time, over 2 decades. And I had such a lovely conversation with him about direct mail. Yes, my friends, direct mail. Sort of going back to the basics here. There are a lot of tidbits. You're definitely going to want to take notes for this one or re-listen. Dave gives some great resources for you to check out in your local community on how you can get started with direct mail, how you would use it. So let me just do a quick read of Dave's bio for you, and then we will jump right in. Dave Fink thinks the best kept secret in marketing is hiding where you least expect it, your mailbox. Over a 20-year career, he's generated hundreds of millions of dollars in ad revenue, powered viral sensations like the Dollar Shave Club, and helped launch celebrity startups for Jessica Simpson, Mary-Kate and Ashley Olsen, and Kate Bosworth. Now, as the founder of Postie, he's out to reinvent direct mail marketing for the digital world. So as you can hear from that, Dave has worked with some pretty impressive brands and people. And his whole philosophy, I feel like, is zagging when other people are zigging. So I love what he's doing. I love the conversation. I hope you enjoy, and let's go ahead and jump right in. All right, Dave, welcome to the Spa Marketing Made Easy podcast. I'm so excited to have you on the show today because you are going to bring a topic that does not get talked about in spa as much as possible. And I think that this can be such a game changer. We're talking about direct mail and how to use it in your business. For brick and mortar, it's like, it can be so huge, so huge.
For sure. Really for any business where you're trying to communicate directly with your customers, versus a wholesale type business where you're manufacturing a product and you're still selling through, traditional wholesale channels and relying on either awareness or retail outlets to kind of drive that engagement with consumers. Channels that have the ability to leverage data and direct messaging directly to your audience gives you a lot of power and the ability to kind of have a dialogue, even though it may feel like it's a one-way dialogue as you're communicating out, that does carry, kind of your brand position, your ability to communicate and control that message and build a relationship with the consumer kind of through all of your marketing efforts.
So in a nutshell, how did you get here? How did you start in direct mail?
Oh, how long is this podcast? A little bit of a winding road, but not too much. So I've been in the consumer internet space, practically the entirety of my career. It's been about 22, 23 years now. And I say that because really the core foundational team behind Postie did not, start from the direct mail world. We didn't work at a print shop or a direct mail agency. We had kind of oscillated our careers back and forth between building direct-to-consumer brands that kind of emerged in kind of the modern era of digital and social and content marketing. And we're able to really, kind of disrupt incumbent brands or carve out, big audiences because, those brands kind of understood how to engage their consumers directly through, various internet channels or digital channels. And then I spent kind of the other half of those 20, some odd years building marketing technology platforms as there were these kind of emerging channels. And some of those go back, 20 years ago that we kind of laugh at now, but like, email and display advertising and retargeting, things that like we just take for granted, like they're obvious marketing channels. So fast forward to today and how we got into direct mail. Really, to me, the interest in kind of that beginning and middle part of my career was, being a change agent and being able to build something from scratch and being able to create advantage out in the marketplace using technology and new channels. And the last 10 years, we lived through this like emergence and dominance of what I called walled gardens, which are marketing channels that are controlled by the owner of that media. And the two big ones that are kind of dominating our worlds are Facebook and Google right now. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of value there. And I'm sure many of your listeners spend a lot of time thinking and obsessing over and stressing over how to engage and build communities of prospects.
Especially with the new iOS updates.
we can certainly get there. That is real and will affect kind of what we can and can't do and the effectiveness of what we do in marketing and just social engagement. But getting back to this idea of walled gardens, like, look, Facebook and Google taught us that we can leverage data and we can think about messaging and we can move really dynamically and we can measure the effectiveness of our ad spends. We can engage directly with consumers, and those were all really good things. And they built a bunch of really sophisticated, innovative technology to allow us to all kind of do things that maybe we couldn't afford to do if we were small businesses, or even if we were big businesses. Maybe it would be really expensive to build the teams to execute on. And that's the positive. The negative is that they're in the game of building $1 trillion valued companies and extracting as much value from each of their customers as they can, and there's negative there. And what ended up happening, at least in our world and many of the advertisers and brands that we work with's world, is that they became so over-indexed in Facebook in particular for demand gen and Google for having the value of engaging with people who have shown intent in their product and services, and kind of gave up on a lot of other channels that didn't have the same level of tools or sophistication. More ad dollars pumped into those channels. Those channels became very expensive because they're marketplaces, and the more ad dollars going in, bidding on those same customer impressions, the higher those rates become. And you look back, you're like, what? I've gotten really good at Facebook marketing, and we can't, find profitable customers on the platform. And so for us, and I apologize for drawing this out a bit, but I do think, that history in marketing business is important. Helps us kind of think about where to invest in the future. But for us, the final straw is like, we look back and we're like, in some of the businesses we're involved with, we're spending millions of dollars a month in Facebook and Google. We're growing our businesses, but we're not able to find, profitability. And so the question became, well, let's get more omni-channel again. Let's think about being a little bit more, let's be more thoughtful in how we're diversifying our marketing spend, and let's find some efficiency. And when we started looking for other channels that we can engage with, the number one priority for us were, channels where we can engage directly with consumers, use a data and measurement approach like we can on social and search, and make sure that channel has scale. And that is direct mail in a nutshell, and really always has been. It just hasn't had a bunch of innovation in marketing on the marketing technology side the way that social and search and programmatic and some of these digital channels have. So hopefully was not an indirect path there.
It's good, but I want to talk a little bit more, because this has always been something really interesting to me. How are you tracking direct mail? Because that has been kind of the missing piece, right? Like direct mail, especially for spa, you move to a new area, you get something in the mail, oh, there's a spa in this area. How are you? I come from a military family. And so we've moved so many times, and always looking for, where am I going to get my hair done? Where am I going to get my nails done? Where am I going to get my spa services? Right. And when you get something in the mail, it's like, oh, okay, well, I'll check this place out instead of having to Google a bunch of places, right? But
sure. So there, with all measurable channels, depending on the data that the brand or advertiser is collecting, kind of determines the opportunities for measurement. So with measurement in direct mail, there are some kind of components of the channel that make it possible, and in some cases very direct to measure. So first of all, the kind of identifying key in how you do targeting in direct mail is at the minimum at the household level, and maybe at the individual level if you have the names of individuals in that household. And that data is I wouldn't necessarily say it's readily available, but it is absolutely available, accessible. And what that means is that when you're building the audiences that you're thinking about targeting, you have the address and potentially have the name of the individuals that you're targeting. The key to measurement is, well, how do you match that back to a conversion event, right? And with your listeners, it's a spa booking, or ideally a spa appointment that was had, and a transaction that was revenue generating. And that's going to come down to what information you're choosing to collect from your customers at the time of booking and or the time of transaction. If you're collecting address, whether it's a billing address or a physical address, which I would highly encourage being part of the registration process. And I think in the world of spas, I think from my experience, usually I'm creating a profile on an online platform where there are kind of consent forms and whatnot, especially in the post-COVID world. I believe I've given that data to spas I've serviced at recently. So most of your listeners are probably doing that currently, which means that now all the individuals that have signed up for a service and have converted on that service over a set period of time, days, weeks, months. And you can then go back and look at the audiences that you mailed and start getting a sense for which of those households that you engaged through mail ended up booking an appointment during, we call it an attribution window, but a kind of a realistic time frame. Usually we see anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks.
So if I'm a spa owner and I go to Postie, does Postie have, if I say I'm in this zip code and I want to do direct mail to females that have this, can we target it in the same way that we can Facebook ads to acquire new clients? Or are we bringing our own data and saying, I want to build a stronger relationship with my existing clients?
Sure. And I'll answer two ways. To be transparent, Postie, our platform today, and while we have plans in the future, you can only be good at so many things so quickly, and we're not quite 6 years old, so we're still on our path here, just like many of probably your business owners are. The small business market is not an area that we're great at servicing right now. With that being said, I think a lot of what we do in the enterprise can be applicable to small business, and obviously I'm a big proponent of the channel in general. So to answer your question directly, yes, Postie, a big value that Postie brings, to our customers is that we have partnerships with kind of the biggest, most credible data providers that are have a reputation for operating in a very consumer aware way, which is really important in today's day and age of kind of data and privacy and personal awareness on how that data is being used. That's mission critical. But there's a lot of data out there that has been collected in the right way and transparent way, and data providers access data on hundreds of millions of Americans that can be used effectively for targeting. That's you asked about gender and geographic location and kind of spending patterns in aggregate and interests and whatnot, and that's the very similar data to what Facebook and Google collect on users based on their browsing activity and what content they're engaging with, where they're spending. Facebook tracks every transaction that happens across the web, almost. And Google as well. So that data is, can be absolutely invaluable in helping you more efficiently identify, those groupings of individuals that are more likely to convert, or that would be wise to spend budget against versus, wasted budget. That data can be found, through local business and agencies. I know there are organizations that, you might know a thing too about this, that aid, your target, listeners, businesses, and understand specific data that would be appropriate to targeting spa owners in certain geographic locations, on a level that's actionable for your audience. It does work. There's kind of two types of marketing in general. There's the more kind of blanketing your canvassing, locations or audiences based on kind of the general understanding of who they are. That's how TV used to be done, or radio used to be done, right? A TV network would kind of survey their viewers every once in a while, using some kind of third-party service, and get a sense for, hey, our audience is 18 to 24 between these hours, and skew 60% female, and then you look, it's like, okay, like that's probably a good show for me to run a TV show on. If you think about Facebook can tell you, like, hey, they might not tell you this, but you're able to, through some of their optimization tools, target individuals who have a high propensity spending in health and wellness, or personal improvement, or spa services, or beauty and skincare. And those individuals are much more likely to be receptive to your marketing than the general population that lives 3 miles around your store location. And so highly encourage, business owners to think about, the type of data, the type of audiences that are more likely to be receptive to their advertising, because there can be a lot of efficiency there. And then you have more profitability, and you have more that you can invest back into your business and the core of your business, which is services and equipment and personnel and the overall spa experience.
Yeah, I think especially now with the pandemic, I'm telling the spa owners, I'm like, think how easy it's going to be to run a business when we're not dealing with COVID and all the, because spas got hit hard. 80% of the spas were shut down. There's still, at time of recording this, Canada just got shut down again. So it's been this influx of opening and closing, and what are the rules, and if your employees are out, and, all of these types of things. But another piece of that changed is how we're marketing. And I believe personally that we always have to be like one step ahead when everybody starts doing one thing. If everybody's doing digital, how can you do print? Or how can you do, how can you show up as something different and not just be part of the white noise, right? Like everyone did an online store and did e-commerce when it first started, right? Because they had to sell their retail products and they had to get money in. But now the amount of e-com stores, it's like, okay, well, how can you be different and do something different to serve your clients at a higher level? So that's why I love this direct mail piece, because in such a digital world, like getting something in the mail that's something different, that piece of mail could sit on someone's countertop, right? Even though you have access to someone with your phone and they're seeing them and all of this type of stuff, that goes away when they set their phone down, right? But if you have that piece of mail, it's a constant reminder of, oh, there's that spa down the street, and I've been wanting to book an appointment for myself or get a gift certificate or whatever it may be.
You touched on a lot of super, I think, valuable and insightful comments there, or topics there. So it reminds me of a story I haven't thought about in a long time, but when when my co-founder and I just started, thinking about this business and the viability of it, and more intimately exploring the channel and the efficacy of the channel, I probably shouldn't be admitting to this. I'll get yelled at, but kind of watch my wife's behavior, and for me, it's valuable because she's not a marketer. She doesn't think like a marketer. I go through the world looking at everything like it's marketing and how it's affecting me from a behavioral psychology or behavioral economic perspective, and maybe it's a little bit of a jaded perspective, but 20 some odd years in the business, that's just kind of shapes how you think about things. She's a first grade teacher. She doesn't think about marketing and how brands communicate. She just, it's a bit more of a traditional, emotional visual reaction to a brand or a product or a service. And I watched her, hold on to a specific mail piece. This was about 6 years ago. And it was an offer from one of them before COVID, right? But for one of the meal kit delivery companies, caught her attention, and she had it on the kitchen table for a while. And for a while, meaning like probably 2 weeks, and then it ended up on our end table, and then it ended up on a refrigerator, and it was probably like 4 weeks later. I got a text during our work days. Oh, I forgot to tell you, I ordered, signed us up for a trial for this meal kit delivery service. They're going to be delivering. If you could put it in the freezer if you get home before I do. And I just thought that was really interesting because that in the digital world, we're so used to doing things in a very specific way. An ad being incredibly ephemeral, meaning you serve a Facebook ad, you serve a display ad. Either that ad drives engagement or it doesn't. Once it's gone, it's gone. Nobody's like taking a screenshot of that ad and then thinking about that ad later on. You have to, you reach that person over and over and over and over and over again until they're finally ready to click. And I just watched, one single direct mail ad engage my wife over, 4 or 5 or 6 weeks, and eventually, kind of made its way from like her maybe internal monologue to actually, transaction.
She's probably there making dinner like, man, if I would have that piece of mail, that delivery service, I wouldn't have to be making dinner right now. Or I wouldn't, going through the decision-making process.
I'm sure. And, and they're not inexpensive, and it's a behavioral change, and, and we're inundated with ways to spend our money day in, day out. So I think that translates back to, yes, certainly thinking counterculture. I think in really all things business can be really helpful. And I'll come back to that in 1 second. But also I think what you were touching on is like the impact of certain types of advertising, and with something like direct mail, or the feeling we get with a movie trailer when we're, sitting at a theater, like that's very different than, thumbing past an Instagram ad, or fast forwarding it, through, a DVR episode and seeing like a commercial on, that we're kind of zoning out on, at 2x or, at 16x speed. And look, like we need to incorporate lots of different ways to engage our customers and think about storytelling and sharing our differentiated, benefits and who we are, and building that emotional connection. There's certain channels that are weightier than others. And by, I think blending both of them, you can have kind of the more ephemeral, repetitive, relatively inexpensive media as part of your advertising strategy. And then you can invest in a weightier, sometimes a little bit more costly, but more impactful media channel. And we've seen that to me has been like the eye-opening part of direct mail. It's not about like the old days of our parents getting, some, cheap feeling newsprint, coupon that, the ink rubbed off in our hands and like you crinkled up and threw in the garbage before you even got in the house. Like now, the brands that we're seeing excel in direct mail are creating content that on, quality paper that uses the same imagery and kind of communication tools that they're using on Instagram and social content and signage in their locations and the overall look and feel
like
of
the whole cohesiveness of the brand and the
that's
advertising.
Exactly right. That's exactly right. The other thing that you touched on that's beyond marketing that I think is just absolutely, an advantage driver, and many businesses don't do this or aren't built around this premise is, the idea of really thinking about, providing something different. And that doesn't have to mean like inventing a new product or a new service per se, but it's how do you differentiate, what you do, and that could be a feel, that could be, the music that's played, that could be the tonal qualities, that could be the overall experience at check-in, that could be the way that the rooms are designed, or the sense of the products that you use in your treatment. That could be the way that you check out or do follow-up. How do you differentiate yourself from every other business providing?
Thinking of two of our spa owners right now that, you think of a spa, what do you think of? Quiet, orchids, cucumbers on the eyes, relaxation, right? Two of our top spa owners are like, one of them has exposed brick and black chandelier, and their people have tattoos and just very like edgy and loud music. Like they're building something totally different. And another gal is like bright yellow, the rooms they have curtains, but not doors. It's more of this. It's just totally different than what you would expect from a spa. And they are doing phenomenal because they're attracting a very particular type of client that want something different.
Yeah, it's not surprising. I mean, obviously you have to know your location and the audience that fit within, what I call your addressable market. But I love that. It's funny, like you said that. I knew you're going there with like the tattoos in particular, and I have a close buddy who does a bunch of spa treatments. Interestingly, we have another friend in common whose wife owns a very notable network of spas here in Austin. But the friend that does the spa treatments doesn't own the spa. He's full body tattooed from head to toe, really thoughtful, intellectual, senior engineer in a major tech company, played in a punk band, etc. Family person with 3 kids and a wife. But that would totally speak to him. He'd feel more comfortable, unquestionably. Is there a big enough demographic? Well, here in Austin, probably, right? In suburban,
she's outside of Chicago. She's outside of Chicago.
Yeah. So makes perfect sense. Does she happen to be in Evanston, or
she's in a place called Urbana?
Okay.
Urbana.
Okay.
I don't know. Exactly.
Yeah, that's the area where University of Illinois is.
Okay.
And I don't know the demographic super well. Obviously, it's a college town, so I don't know. Tattoos probably are.
I love it because she focuses on be your own beautiful and accept yourself how you are. And in the spa industry, there's a lot of, holding beauty to a certain standard. And it's really about, in my opinion, being comfortable with yourself. And everybody has something beautiful about them, and really coming from that place of self-acceptance. So she's challenging the status quo of the entire industry in a way, which
I love it. I mean, look, I wouldn't say that I'm a frequent visitor of spas, but I do use specific services, and I certainly, I look forward to getting massages when I can. I feel uncomfortable walking into most spas, and look, part of that I think is quite frankly just like I sometimes feel guilty about pampering myself, and some of it's like that craziness that goes on in my head. Like, why should I deserve to, spend this kind of money to, have, have a professional, provide a service like this to me. But it does feel, I do walk in and still at 46 years old, feel a little out of place. Like I don't fit in this world, which I've gotten, more, confident or less caring over time. But, certainly for many, many years, I feel very conspicuous when I open, grab that door handle and walk in. So that's certainly, one way that you can differentiate. But I think that's the beauty of that is if you're able to, and I talk about this a lot internally, and I have on some other podcasts, but like businesses that are built mission driven, I think tend to have a higher probability of finding success and weathering the rough storms that we all face in business, as you mentioned with dealing with kind of the lack of control and during the pandemic for your clientele and listeners. And when I use mission driven, it doesn't mean like you're saving the world, right? It's not like, hey, we're going to third world countries and building schools,
giving everyone clean water, or all that.
Those are amazing missions, but mission, in our world, the mission is like, how do we help brands break beyond the walled gardens and take back more control over their growth and the way that they can engage with customers without having to pay the Facebook tax or the Google tax. In this spa in Illinois, their mission may be creating a comfortable place for people that wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable in a traditional spa, and they get to get up every day and be really focused on that mission. Like their decision tree becomes that much easier to navigate, because it's not like we're another spa that is competing with these other 10 spas within 5-mile radius or 10-mile radius. And, how do we beat them at each of, the services they provide? Or are we dealing with price, or, what is it? Are we making scheduling easy? It's no, we're getting up every day and we're thinking about ways that we can, make a certain group of people feel comfortable in an environment that they deserve just as much as everybody else, but maybe wouldn't have felt comfortable. I love that. I mean, that's.
And I'm thinking to bring it back to direct mail, having a beautiful cardstock with a picture of the spa where it's like the exposed brick, the black chandelier, the people that work there, those types of things for someone who maybe doesn't feel comfortable in a traditional spa setting, seeing that and saying, wow, I didn't even know that somewhere like this existed. And because you may not be able to target someone like that on Facebook, or it may not show up in their feed, or they may not even realize it's a spa, but just getting that exposure and that brand awareness that, there is a place for someone like me, could be really, really powerful.
Yeah. Look, I'm all for everybody should be using direct mail 100%. But as you can tell, I'm a business, owner and builder myself, and I can't help but think even just, more broadly, like, so those same types of direct mail is beneficial because you can control the imagery and the messaging, and exactly as you just said, you can blend, the editorial content that helps kind of draw attention to the overall look and feel or service or product or essence that you're trying to convey through imagery. I'm going to meander here. I'm going to go two different ways. So one thing that I think is that also helps with that, especially when you think like maybe you're not a mission-driven business yet, but you're trying to figure out what could be our mission. You're a successful business, you have customers, and you're trying to uncover like what is the differentiation that your clientele is gravitating towards. Well, now I'm going to go back on my words, and every media channel has benefits. In social, take Instagram. You're working and you're spending time and potentially money to build your following. But once you have an audience, you get to post content for free. You have to pay for the ads, but you get to post content to your feed, and you can see engagement numbers. So one of the activities that our team does with clients that are asking for help on creative, like sometimes they come in and they're like, we've never done direct mail. And they get so like flustered, like, oh my, gosh, can you help with creative and design? And like, what do we do here? And we just kind of like get them to take a deep breath. provide our version of a spa, treatment, like, let's get you into a relaxed mood. And then we'll just like do a screen share and hop on their Instagram page. And we're like, what are, out of like the last 30 posts, like what are the 2 or 3 that have the highest engagement? And then usually those 3 highest engaged posts are very similar and share something in common. And then our attitude is like, well, just, let's take this type of creative and just, start by resizing it for direct mail. It's not like there's something special. You want consistency. You want to find what's resonating with your customers. You want to, again, think, into how you can be mission driven and use every consumer experience and touch point to drive home that differentiation, that value prop that you're bringing to them. And so, and then to have the ability to kind of leverage social for that breezy, almost like market research, and then be able to port that over to a channel that like direct mail that is going to have a weightier, maybe more impactful conversion driving experience. All of a sudden marketing starts coming alive.
I love that. So in wrapping up, where would you send someone that's like, hey, I want to learn more about this. I want to, so Postie is for bigger enterprise. Is that correct?
It's for fast growing startups and bigger enterprises. I mean, to put it in perspective, the typical clients, budgets on the Postie platform are between a couple $100,000 a year and millions of dollars a year. So that like they're definitely spa clients. They're definitely health and wellness. They're definitely beauty and skincare and cosmetic brands that are leveraging Postie. But for single or couple location businesses, it may be a bit overwhelming. We will have a local and small business product at some point, but there's a different way that we engage with and different variation of the product that would make sense for that target audience in our world, and we would want to do that really well, and we're not there yet. So for your audience, they're certainly on the creative front, they can control that, right? Like the same type of creative that we talked about that they're leveraging that's working well that on Instagram can be used to turn into direct mail. The key is going to be how they think about targeting, and they can you can go directly to the traditional data providers. You may not be able to do the same level of sophistication around data science and machine learning and predictive model building, but you're also talking about understanding the addressable market, the footprint around each of your locations. So you're talking about starting with a smaller grouping of households and individuals, and then you can look at going to the Experian, Epsilon, Axiom. These are credible data providers that each have small business portals as well that allow you to basically license audiences based on demographic and spending. So they will all have interesting data points that you can use to shape your audience. The other data set that I believe they each have, we certainly carry it and see it effective. That gets back to, I think, the first thing that you opened with, which is, you're a military family, you're, from every couple of years, you're moving and you have to figure out who your trusted service providers and local restaurants and schools and whatever in those locations are. There's kind of a campaign that generally works for a broad set of services, and that's new mover targets. So even through the U.S. Postal Service, and I believe just on their website, it's possible to access a file of new movers in a set of zip codes or locales. And for me, if I was one of your listeners or one of your clients, that's where I would start. I would make sure that every single week or every single month, depending on how big of a locale and how many households they are, that I was reaching out to every new every new mover. And then I would also look for creative ways to reach people who are new to the neighborhood beyond just those data sets. but if they think about, your service area and the people that are going to be making those first, those first, appointments with the service provider, and it's got to start with awareness. And I know your audience is also thinking about signage and location of the real estate for that same reason, but you can reach new movers through the mail. I can also do a little bit of research and have our team do a little bit of research and even post wrap here, see if I can get you some links that you can share on your social channels.
That would be amazing. Yeah, that would be amazing. Well, thank you so much for this, Dave. This was so, I feel like the wheels are turning, and I want everyone listening to really just give yourself a minute to step back. And Dave mentioned earlier, like, I'm always living as a marketer. I'm always everything that I'm looking at. And I do that too. I don't necessarily consider myself a marketer, but I guess I am. Everywhere I go, if I'm going to Pure Bar, if I'm going to the grocery store, if I'm going to this, I'm looking at what promotion they're running and what I'm attracted to and what specifically about that I'm attracted to and how can I apply that to spa. So zoom out and think about how you find your places, and whether that's spa or not, but the places that you like frequenting or having relationships with. And did you find any of those through direct mail? Did you find any of those through Facebook ads? Did you find any of those? Like, how are you learning about these things and apply that to your business? I think thinking differently is so, so important to the success of any small business. So we will hopefully get some links from Dave that we can post below this show. We'll do some of our own research as well and provide as many resources as we can. And as always, if you want to keep the conversation going, please head on over to the Spa Marketing Made Easy Facebook group. We'll catch you on the next episode.